episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, very, very much appreciated. Also got a lovely email from Hugh at James Eady. They liked the show, they liked the honest review, and yeah, I suppose the thing is that this is the sort of thing that I hear quite a lot, is that you know, not only from viewers but from independent bottling companies and distilleries and what have you, is that the fact that I give an honest opinion. You know, it's not everything is wonderful, and not everything is pretty dreadful, but at the end of the day, obviously all I can do is give my honest opinion of the sample that's in front of me, and you know, whether you, the general public, want to actually go and purchase that, of course that is entirely up to you. But so all I can say is what I feel, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. So and like I said, everybody seems to be sort of, you know, more than happy. I mean, there's occasional gripe, shall we say, but if you're going to sort of, you know, put your opinions out there, shall we say, then occasionally you have to expect a bit of that. But anyway, like I said, most of the feedback generally tends to be really positive. So so this week I thought I would stick with the independent theme. Why not? I love the independent sector, as you well know, and I'm looking at a relatively new independent bottling company called by the name of Dràm Mòr. Dràm Mòr is based in Dumbarton in Scotland, and was established in 2019 by the husband and wife team Kenny and Victoria MacDonald. And as you may well know, this is not the first time I've reviewed some of their bottlings. I had 2 or 3 in a rum episode of the show that I did not so long ago, but I thought it was probably about time I did an actual show purely on them, as Victoria kindly send me samples these days. The company itself was founded, like I said, in 2019, so it's not been around for an awful long time. Originally they was set up as an export agency for various Scottish brands, but over the period of time they decided that they wanted to sort of bottle some stuff of their own, and well, why not? You know, I mean, both of them had been involved in the whisky industry for many years, and obviously decided that there was a market. I mean, thinking of, you know, the last 5 years, there's been an absolute explosion, or certainly at least since 2008. I mean, if you cast your mind back to sort of like the crash of 2008, 2009, there was all this sort of doom and gloom about the independent sector and how distilleries wouldn't be selling casks and the independents would go to the wall and all this kind of stuff. And well, that turned out to be absolutely wrong. I mean, it was right in the fact that a lot of distilleries stopped selling stuff into the secondary market, but it didn't signify the end of the independent sector. In actual fact, it probably did exactly the opposite. Since 2008, 2009, there's just been an inordinate explosion in the number of independent bottling companies that appeared. I mean, at the end of the day, what do you need really to be an independent bottling company? Money. That's basically what it boils down to. Money to be able to buy the inflated price of casks these days. That's what you need. Lots of bloody money, in actual fact. And you know, you design a label and, well, hey, there you go, you're an independent bottling company. I mean, yeah, all right, there's a little bit more to it than that, but essentially at the end of the day, anybody could do it. You know, if you've got the passion and the money, you know, you could set yourself up as an independent bottling company. It's not difficult to do. The hard bit is finding decent cask, but of course, like I said, it's you know, it's a little more to it than meets the eye. But so I thought, let's take a look at their range. I mean, as you probably know, Dumbarton is probably more well known for having a crack football team. Why not offend somebody or anybody? Let's offend the whole of Dumbarton. Why not? No, honestly, I don't know anything about Scottish football, so apart from obviously Celtic, Rangers, you know, I have no idea what division Dumbarton play in or how good or bad they are. But anyway, so Dumbarton is obviously most well known and most famous for its distillery, the huge grain distillery that was built in Dumbarton in 1936 by the good old Hiram Walker. Now, of course, as you well know, Dumbarton closed in 2002, was partially demolished, and I think the final part, the huge still housing finally came down in 2017, and interestingly enough, Dumbarton was one of the, I think it was the first actually grain distillery in Scotland that was using stainless steel columns instead of copper columns. So interesting place. I mean, you know, there was I was reading some stuff about the distillery when it was about to sort of come, the final part of it was about to come down. A lot of people were basically saying it's completely not a bloody eyesore. Other people were saying, well, it's part of the history of Dumbarton, they should have used it and reintegrated it into the whole redevelopment of the area. Yeah, maybe they should, but I suppose when you've got a huge bloody thing like that, which probably was going to be really difficult to sort of like reuse, it's probably the easiest thing would probably just knock the whole damn thing down and just, well, leave Dumbarton distillery to the archives, I suppose. Talking of archives, well, I'm not talking of archives, I wonder whatever happened to the flock of geese. You might actually know that there was, at the time, it was home to a load of Chinese geese, bizarrely enough, and that they used to sort of wander around the distillery, I believe, a bit like sort of the ravens in the Tower of London. Whether them leaving actually heralded the end of the distillery, I don't honestly know, but anyway, one of those lovely, weird and wonderful stories you get with Scottish distilleries. Anyway, enough of that. We're not here to talk about Dumbarton, but maybe one of these days I'll do have I done an episode of the show? Must have done an episode of the show on Dumbarton. Somebody will tell me if I have anyway. So, without further ado, let's just take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so as I said, this is the most recent batch of releases from Dràm Mòr. This is a 10-year-old Benrinnes. It was bottled at 57.5%, distilled in 2013, obviously bottled this year. Single bourbon hoggy, refill bourbon hoggy, 300 745. And the nice thing about their current batch of releases is lots of American oak age stuff. You know, they haven't quite gone down the sort of route of everything must be finished in a wine cask. There are a few finishes, but you know, thankfully we're getting some predominantly American oak aged bottlings anyway. Bottling number 2 is an 11-year-old Blair Athol, again refill bourbon hoggy, number 308610, distilled in 2011, bottled this year at 56%. Bottling number 3 is a 13-year-old Mannochmore, again another refill bourbon hogshead, number 3088. It is 13 years old, distilled in 2010 and bottled at 54.8%. First sherried one of the day. No, it's not a sherried one, I tell a lie. It is a first, not really, it's not finished either. What am I talking about? It's a Speyside, from the Speyside Distillery. It's an 8-year-old, aged in a first fill Moscatel hoggy, 2432, distilled in 2014 and bottled at 51.7%. Read your bloody notes, as they say. The second to last bottling is a sherried bottling. This is one of my favourite distilleries. Oh yeah. It's a Tullibardine. It's an 8-year-old Tullibardine. Whoa. That's been aged in a first fill Pedro Ximenez cask. Whoa. Cask number 650932, distilled in 2015 and bottled at 53.7%. And the final bottling of the day is a Glengarry. It's a 10-year-old Glengarry. Interestingly enough, aged in an ex-Williamson cask. Now, for those of you that are an ex-Williamson hoggy, number 1005, for those of you that don't know what Williamson is, it's teaspooned Lefroy, interestingly enough. Don't know what it's been teaspooned with, but it's been teaspooned with something. So it ain't Lefroy anymore, as they say, Toto. Anyway, so it's 10 years old, distilled in 2013 and bottled at 57.1%. And we know how much influence casks can have on the spirit, so we'll see what the balance of that one is like. So anyway, time to start with some Benrinnes then. Okay, so this is the 10-year-old Benrinnes, 57.5%. Well, you can notice the alcohol, it has to be said. That is certainly front and centre and quite prickly on the nose. A little bit of apricot, some honey, a little bit of industrial barley. I mean, it's got that kind of weighty, malty character. I mean, Benrinnes, I believe, still uses worm tubs, I think, and ends up with quite a meaty spirit. There is a bit of a kind of hardness there, a bit of an industrial note. I mean, it's possible that it is slightly fainty, that maybe it needed a little bit more time in the cask. I mean, that's always the problem with that type of distillery. It just needs time to remove all of the sulphur compounds. But when it does, you get a lovely malty, meaty, chewy malt. There's a little bit of beeswax, a little bit of... I mean, because the alcohol is so intense, it's coming across with that almost kind of neutral grain spirit kind of nip to it. It's obviously going to need some water. Not a huge amount of oak, a little bit of tea leaf, bit of vanilla, a little bit of vanilla, but not a great deal of oak coming through. And well used cask, one imagines. Let's see what the pal's like. Chunky, full, malty, again quite alcoholic. It is masking the finish quite considerably. There's some honey, beeswax, hard barley, white fruit. There's no real finish. The alcohol has just basically cut that one off, but a little bit of vanilla on the aftertaste. The oak does come through. So this is definitely one of those bottlings that does require dilution, I think, if we're going to get something out of it. Not really done an awful lot for it, has to be said. It's kind of become overtly oily, too oily. There's an almost kind of linseed note coming through. There's a little bit more sweeter barley, but it's kind of heavy. It's kind of, the oils have now come out and they've kind of put a real dampener on the aromatic element of the nose. It's a little bit more oak, possibly a little bit more vanilla, but again it just feels oily. Let's see what the pal's like. A little bit vague, a little bit nondescript, to be honest with you. It's pleasant, it's okay, but that, I think it's just not had enough time in the cask. I think it's kind of like a little bit too young. There was obviously that sort of slight hardness, that slight sort of faintiness still remaining on the nose, and I just think it just hasn't quite kind of developed enough yet. And this is the thing, you look at it and you think it's a 10-year-old, it should be fine for bottling, but the reality is, of course, that a number is just a number at the end of the day, and all casks will mature at their own sort of leisurely pace. I would have left this for a few more years just to see if it kind of came together with water. I mean, yeah, it might never have done. It may well just be one of those casks that was never going to take water particularly well, and didn't matter how old it is, it was never going to sort of like come round. But, you know, at the end of the day, it is what it is. So, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the Blair Athol, yet another one of those malty and meaty malts. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Kind of classic Blair Athol. It is malty, barleyed, slightly herbal, some apricot, rich, dense, or sub-honey notes. Not really honeyed. It's got that kind of malty, weighty, kind of almost honeyed kind of feel to it. A little bit of citrus. I mean, you could argue it's a little bit four-square. It's a little bit, I wouldn't quite go as far as saying ungainly. Again, it is Blair Athol after all. Blair Athol does have a tendency, like I said, to be a bit like Benrinnes. Big, full, malty. Maybe not the most sort of elegant of malts at the end of the day, but, you know, so you can't argue that it doesn't have plenty of distillery character. There's a little bit of minerality, a little bit of oak. We're not talking, again, not a huge amount of oak input. So we are getting lots and lots of spirit character. Not necessarily a bad thing. Bit of green fruit coming through now, a bit of gooseberry. Anyway, let's see what the palate is like. Yeah, pleasant. I mean, again, like the nose, full, malty, apricot, barleyed, a little bit of subdued honey. 56%, a little masked, but in actual fact you could get away with drinking that quite comfortably. There's a little bit of citrus, a little bit of green fruit, a little bit of minerality on the finish. It's a sort of pretty much straightforward, pleasant Blair Athol. Let's see what a little drop of water does. Like I said, I don't think it really needed any water. It's got a bit of a spicy prickle on the aftertaste, which is quite pleasant, but let's see what a little drop of water does. Well, that's quite nice. It's brought out the sort of like the aromatic side of it, the spirit, so it's quite floral now. It's sort of got that kind of pollen, heavy floral kind of note. Again, not exactly hugely complex, but again pleasant. A little bit of ginger, possibly a little bit more sort of kind of oak coming through now, with a sort of an almost kind of virginy oak sort of note, which is interesting. Let's see what that's like. Palate again hasn't really worked. It's not really taken. I mean, the nose kind of took a little bit of dilution well, but the palate really hasn't. It's not really done anything for it. It's a bit sort of yeah, okay, pleasant, okay, reasonable length, a little bit homogeneous, I would say. Nothing is really particularly standing out. So yeah, neat. I'm okay with that. It's not too bad a whiskey. It's very much a Blair Athol, and it kind of comes across as you would expect a Blair Athol to do. So yeah. Okay, so moving on to sample number 3. This is the 13-year-old Mannochmore. Let's see what nose gives us on this end. Oh, that's a bit of a weird nose, but weird in a kind of interesting way. It's got a sort of, it's a bit fusel, it has to be said. It's got this kind of petrol-y, Riesling-y kind of character. A little bit of lemon oil, barley, industrial barley notes. Touch of oxidised fruit. It's a bit of a weird nose. I mean, on the one hand it feels like there's some age to it. You've got that oxidative kind of character. On the other hand you've got this sort of like fusel character. A little bit of bread, a little bit of marzipan. Well, now what the hell's Mannochmore's kind of character? I think it's, well, more often than not it tends to be sort of a light kind of grassy spade, doesn't it? This is having one of those kind of moments, I think, because this doesn't come across like Mannochmore. I quite like it in actual fact. I like the weirdness. It's kind of, it's weirdly appealing. Obviously it's not going to, you know, not everybody's going to love this kind of thing, but, you know, it's kind of another one of those sort of independent bottlings that you sort of look at and you go, that's a weird one. Yeah, certainly for Mannochmore anyway. Anyway, let's see what it passes like. Again, that is a really odd one. I mean, it kicks off with that sort of oily, Riesling-y, petrol-y sort of fusel kind of character, and then comes some sweet barley, oxidised apricot, apple. It's got a lovely juiciness on the mid palate. It's got a good length as well. The oak is kind of coming in on the end, it has to be said. A bit of spice, a bit of almost kind of apple blossom. I mean, it is really intriguing. I mean, you know, it is a bit weird and wonderful. It's not going to appeal to everybody, but it's, like I said, it's interesting. And it's certainly not what you'd expect from a Mannochmore. I'm going to put a little drop of water. Again, little masked, not overly. I don't really think it needs any water. I really hope it's not going to fall apart with water. No, it's possibly brought out the oak a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit more sort of kind of marzipan. It's still, and it's maybe a little bit more fragrant, but it's still got that kind of slightly sort of Riesling-y kind of funkiness. So I'll pass on out. Yeah, it's a less funky. I'm not getting so much of that Riesling-y kind of note. It's a little bit more sort of honey and oxidised fruit and barley, and again that sort of appley blossom kind of note. I mean, it's a nice whiskey. Obviously, put a little drop of water with it, and it becomes a little bit less weird. But you know, it just kind of, it's not quite as weird as the, what the hell was that Carn Mòr? There was a Carn Mòr. A Dufftown or something like that was aged or finished in an ex-Austrian Riesling cask. I mean, that was kind of like, you know, off the scale weirdness. It's not quite at that kind of level, but it's interestingly weird. So, Right, okay, so let's move on to the Speyside first fill Muscatel Hogshead. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Yeah, that's a Muscatel hoggy. Lots and lots of biscuity, sweet, grapey, winey fruit, honey, oxidised apple, more biscuits, burnt toast. Distillery character? No, not getting any distillery character whatsoever. This is all about the cask. Again, it's very, very clean, very nice, very, very Muscatelly. Very intense. Let's see what the pass like. Sweet, biscuity, oxidised grape, dried grape, green grape, bit tannic, noticeable alcohol, a bit masked. Didn't really have enough to actually put a little drop of water with it. It's very much all about the cask at the end of the day. No real distillery character. It just sort of could be. It could be from any Speyside distillery. It has to be said, because the cask is pretty damn dominant. Like I said, very clean, very pleasant. If you like Muscatel matured spirits, then obviously you're going to really enjoy that. For me, I'd like to have seen a little bit more balance, but that's me. Okay, so moving on to my favourite distillery. Yeah, I know I keep saying it. That's a bit of a crappy old joke, really, isn't it? Anyway, I mean, Tullibardine isn't that bad, it has to be said. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Big, grapey, treacly, coffee, toffee, raisins, little edginess there, which you would expect from Tullibardine. One of those instances where you actually doesn't really matter whether you get a great deal of distillery character at the end of the day. It's, again, it's very, very much dominated by the PX cask. I mean, I will say that the Tullibardine stands up to it. You do get a little bit of the hardness of the distillery character coming through. So in that respect, you know, you're quite right. You know, Tullibardine is quite well suited to being hammered by sherry, a bit like sort of, you know, Glengoyne and Glenfarclas at the end of the day. That has that style that handles it, but. Like I said, you know, it's very clean, no sulphur. Let's see what the pass like. Yeah, again, very, very sherry. Lots of dried fruit, little herbal notes, some treacle, coffee and pepper. Nice coffee and pepper on the mid palate, actually. A little bit of hard barley, a little mast, a little short. The sherry does kind of, to a certain extent, run out of steam a little bit, and you end up with some of the distillery character coming through right on the aftertaste. So I suppose at the end of the day you can say, well, that's actually not too badly balanced. You do get some distillery character. So you can't argue with that. Yeah, okay, nose is it's become a bit chocolatey. It's got that sort of mockery kind of note happening. The sort of, the coffee note is still there and it's become more kind of chocolatey. Yeah, that's what part I know. Yeah, it's become a bit kind of, yeah, it's a sherry cask whiskey. It kind of lacked a little bit of the complexity neat, but the point is it didn't really need water. I mean, it's only 53.7% at the end of the day, so you could get away with that without water with that one. And I think with water it was perfectly adequate, as they say. So yeah. Right, okay, so on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. This is the 10-year-old Glengarry, aged in an ex-Williamson hoggy. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? That's a nice nose. So I'm actually getting quite a lot of distillery character. Sort of unsweetened banana, apricot, white pepper. Maybe not quite as herbal as some Glengarrys. Although there is a little bit of herbalness developing, but it's kind of not only sort of, you know, distillery character herbalness, there's a little bit of herbal peat kind of happening as well. Lemon, vanilla, dusty peat, an echo of peat, not a huge peat monster. I think the balance on that is pretty damn good, actually. I really like that. The oak is not sort of overwhelming the spirit. There's absolutely oodles of Glengarry character, but with a sort of like a little bit of a smokiness there in the background. Absolutely fantastic, perfect. This is my kind of whiskey, it has to be said. Let's show a pass one. Unmistakable Islay cask to start off with, quite peated, quite charry, quite intense, but mid palate starts at the barley is starting to come through, a little bit of rich spirit character, a little bit of herbalness, spirit character herbalness, honey, vanilla. The peat is kind of still there. It kind of starts off quite intense and just sort of drops off throughout as the palate kind of develops, and it kind of like ends with this kind of almost sort of light sooty sort of smokiness. That's a lovely whiskey at the end of the day. I really like how that develops in the mouth. I mean, that's it. Not only am I interested, you know, in the balance, I also like progression as well. I don't really want a whiskey to just basically sort of give it all to me straight away and then sort of, you know, have nothing left in the tank, as they say. Let's put a little drop of water with it. I don't think, again, almost 57%, it really doesn't feel like it. It's just so easy to drink without water. More spirit character on the nose, more Glengarry character, a lot less Islay. Yeah, I personally, again, I think neat, it's perfectly fine. Let's see what pass on that. Yeah, it's gone pretty much the same way. In actual fact, it's got quite heathery now. I mean, I often do get that sort of heatheriness in Glengarry, but it's definitely noticeable now. You put a little drop of water with it. The Islay cask is pretty much all melted away. It's a kind of a background whiff of smoke now, it has to be said. But either way, I think that is absolutely fabulous. I mean, really very, very good. I like that. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Victoria for the samples for today's episode of the show, and just to remind you that any comments that I have made throughout the show are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance to the company that actually employs me. Yeah, okay, a mixed bunch, I will say. The Benrinnes certainly had plenty of Benrinnes kind of character. Lots of malty, meaty sort ofness. some barley, sort of. I thought the nose was pretty good. Putting sort of like, once it was diluted, it kind of like all, well, I wouldn't go say pear-shaped, but it wasn't as interesting. And it needed a little drop of water. The alcohol was really, really noticeable. And yeah, so it just wasn't sort of my kind of cup of tea, it has to be said. The Blair Athol, again, kind of in the same kind of manner as the Benrinnes. Again, you know, undiluted, it was, you know, pretty much spot on Blair Athol as you would expect. Maybe not the most complex bottlings that I've ever come across, and but again, it just didn't really take water particularly well, and that was a bit of a disappointment. Really liked the Mannochmore, like I said. Neat, that was a bit weird and wonderful, it has to be said, but in not, you know, in an interesting kind of way. A little drop of water kind of made it more sort of unweird, and a little bit more sort of as you would expect. But you know, it just appealed to me at the end of the day as one of those kind of interesting oddities that you occasionally sort of come across. Speyside 8-year-old, well, yeah, okay. It wasn't a bad bottling. It's the sort of thing, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't, kind of thing. You know, it was pretty much all about the Muscatel cask. Didn't get any distillery character at all, but it was all pretty clean. And the Tullibardine, I think the balance was okay on that. You did get some distillery character along with the sherry, so you know, tick there. Whether you like the distillery character of Tullibardine, of course, is another matter entirely, but you can't argue that it did display some balance. And the Glengarry, yeah, to me, standout bottling of the afternoon. Really, really enjoyable. Classic example of not letting a cask dictate the terms of the flavour profile. Nicely integrated. I don't know whether that was wholly aged in the X Williamson cask, whether that was a pretty much refill X Williams cask, whether it was a finish, I don't know. I'm guessing it's probably spent all its life in the X Williamson cask, and it just wasn't a particularly active cask per se, because it's just balanced really, really well. So if you like a little bit of smoke, a little bit of peat, you know, that is certainly a really good one to go for. So yeah, nice whiskey. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hope you've enjoyed it. If Dràm Mòr are available in your locale, certainly worth taking a look at. So I hope you do. Anyway, until next week. Don't seem to actually have any whiskey left, which is a bit unfortunate. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.